Okay, so I've gone around to all the groups and I noticed you all had your verbs underlined. I'm sorry, your verbs highlighted and your nouns underlined. And I hope that that helps you get a better understanding of what they need to do because all of those verbs, that's how they're going to be asked to do it. Are they just going to be asked to use, to represent, to generate? You have to know those things. So the next step in stage one is you want to look at your vertical alignment. So identify the learning progression of the teeth. So what are they going to get to need to know next year? That's going to help you see where you need to get them to be ready to learn because we want to have them ready for those next grade level teeth. And I'm sure the next grade level teachers will greatly appreciate you having them ready and being able to do that next step. It'll also allow you to know where they finish. So if you're a first grade teacher, know what they did in kindergarten. For example, the money. In kindergarten, they're just learning to identify. They're not learning the amounts, they're learning to identify. Where in first grade, they're learning to, they already know how to identify. You're teaching them how much each is worth and to count. And then you can look what they're doing in second grade. Second grade, they're adding the quarter, counting the quarter with all of the money. So seeing just the progression of where they need to be in each grade level and where you need to have them ready and where you need to pick up from what they already know. It'll also give you a chance to notice the changes in rigor or gaps. So did they leave something out of the TEKS that you need to fill in order for them to be able to do this next thing for the next grade level? Or how in depth the rigor, how in depth they need to know that concept. So it's very, very important that you use that vertical alignment. And the district, most districts have it laid out for you. All you have to do is print that document and you can put it in a binder and look at it every time to be able to identify the vertical alignment for each TEK. The next stage in effective planning is evidence of learning. So this is your assessment piece. So these are some question stems that you can ask yourself. How do we know that they have learned count money? What does it look like when the students have learned? What do we do if they do not learn? So how are you going to change it if you assess them and they didn't know? Well, how are you going to be flexible in order to teach those students that maybe got lost along the way? And what do we do if they learn blank? So if they learn it sooner than you thought, what are you going to do to differentiate to be able to get a broader spectrum of their understanding? So these are all questions that you can use to guide your assessment. So what I've done is I've given each group an assessment from just a book that the district has. For example, our Envision book. So what you can do is I want you to go through these questions. There's only 5 or 8 questions and see if they match the TEK that I've given to you. And one thing I want to point out is this book, in order for Pearson, let's say, a textbook company to make it, they have to make it to match more than one state or they're only going to be able to sell to one state. So just because you pulled an assessment out of a book that was given to you doesn't mean that it matches. So it's so important that you go through those TEKS and those questions and make sure that you can match them. And that's something that a lot of teachers don't realize, and I've actually recently learned that these books are for different states. You have to make sure they match what you're teaching because we don't want the students to get there and panic because they don't know anything, or we don't want to grade them on something that we haven't taught them or we shouldn't expect them to be doing yet. So you can ask these questions when you're determining what kind of assessment you use, but right now I want you to go around at your table and just see if these assessments are matching and see what you find. And if you were going to give this actual assessment, what questions you would take out. Would you change a question to see how they matched? And what you would do. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to do that. So as I was walking around and you were doing this activity, I was loving the conversations that I was hearing because I think some of these things are things that we've done that we've never even thought about. Does this match the TEKS? We've just grabbed it because it was given to us. When I was doing this activity with one of the standards that I had, actually, I got the assessment out of the Envisions book. It was something that was provided to me, and it only had 5 questions, and I found that 3 out of the 5 questions did not match the standards that we were supposed to be teaching in our classrooms in the state of Texas. So from that point on, when I was doing it, I really made sure that I checked to make sure that I was expecting the students to do what I asked them. An assessment doesn't have to be a test out of a book. It can be an observation. It can be you call them to your table and you ask them to show you a problem with manipulatives. That can be an assessment just depending on what you're teaching, how you're going to assess that. So you need to look at those verbs. Go back to stage 1. Look at those verbs when you're unpacking the TEK of what they should be expected to do and how they're doing it. So the next step is your learning plan. So this is your instruction. How are you going to get them to this point? So the easiest way to do this that I found is take it unit by unit. So when you're doing units, so you plan the entire unit. And one person that I've used effective planning pointed out to me is you can use those verbs to help grow. Because a lot of times in those student expectations, they're growing. It goes from use to demonstrate to analyze, and so it's getting harder every time, so you can use those to guide your lesson. And this time you have to think about what your students do best. Are your students more hands-on? Do they like to use technology? How are you going to present this to a student? So just because you plan together in a grade level does not mean your instruction is going to look the exact same. You have to know your students. Are you going to approach it in small group or are you going to approach it in a whole group? You have to look at the standard. You just have to know your students to know what you're going to do and how it's going to affect your students. During planning time and you get to stage 3 and you're using this effective planning model, you can talk about the different ways you might use it in your classroom. And you guys can go take all of those ideas and then change it to fit your classroom. And this also means if your student just isn't getting it, how are you going to be flexible and reach them in a different way if you need to? So this is really the how you are going to do that. And it takes a lot of thought, but it just, once you unpack that TEK, it should be a little bit easier to know what you need to do every single day. So I hope after this that you've gotten a better idea of what effective planning means and what it looks like for you. So what I want you to do is I've given everyone a sticky note and I want you to write this down. This is for yourself. You're not going to give it to anyone. You're not going to give it to me. Just write to yourself effective planning means and what it means to you. Maybe it's just 3 words. Maybe you're going to take away the unpacking of the TEKs or the vertical alignment. Just your takeaway from this and how you're going to use it in the future and what it might look like for your grade level. So thank you so much for coming. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer. I will also share this information with you so that you'll have it to use in the future.